All right, everyone, as you slowly start logging in and joining us, we want to welcome you. This is our third ever Scientists and CEOs Night. It's one of our favorite events that we hold. We hold it in collaboration with our nonprofit partner, Everblue. And Ellie is our renowned MC. She's incredibly skilled at leading and guiding a conversation. So she's going to do a majority of that. Everyone who's in the audience, you can add questions, you can ask questions, you can type them, and we'll make sure to include them in the conversation as this goes. Those of you who have never heard of CBlue or Everblue, Ellie will give a little bit more of an introduction into Everblue. But CBlue Collective, Lauren and I are the co-founders. Tiari is the third co-founder. We launched a year and a half ago, and really what we're focused on is bringing together small business owners who are working to build ocean-friendly businesses. And by that, expanding the community that they have access to and truly working to define what does ocean-friendly mean in a consumer space. And so that's definitely a working definition, and we're still kind of working to communicate that to our consumer base. But you'll hear that kind of topic throughout this conversation this evening. And with that, Ellie, would you like to launch into it, or we can give it another minute?
Yeah, absolutely. It's about 7:35, so we've got people a little bit of time to log into the Zoom. But I think we can go ahead and just launch into the discussion and let people get started with the conversation. My name's Ellie. Clarissa introduced me a little bit, but I'm the founder of Everblue. We are a science communication initiative. And so we work on trying to make science more accessible, understandable, and interesting to people who aren't necessarily scientists. And we also like to try and connect people with scientists and researchers who are doing work in events like this. So we can get to have conversations with people who are working in science. And so we've been so thankful for our partner, CBlue, getting to connect us with all of your vendors over the last couple of years, and getting to have these events where we get to facilitate these really awesome discussions between people who are working in the industry, working on their own small businesses, and people who are working in research to try and, do a little brain meld and get to see where we can go in a talk about sustainability and how we use sustainability in science and business. So I'm stoked. These are one of our favorite, this is one of my favorite events that we do as an organization. I know CBlue feels the same. So thank you all for logging on. And thank you to our panelists for getting to come and share their expertise, their knowledge, and their experience and their stories today. And with that, I would love to have our panelists get to introduce themselves. So I'll go ahead and call your name out. We'll start with our science panel, and then we'll move to our vendor panel. And I'll let you know when you can go. And we would love to hear just a little bit more about you, your work, and what you'd like to get from this event. So Bonnie, if you want to go ahead and take us away. Bonnie's been on a couple of our panels before, so I'm gonna throw her in first. Oh, Bonnie, you're muted. Go ahead.
Minor details. So thank you all for being here tonight. This is one of my favorite events to Ellie. I mean, this is really where the magic happens. Unfortunately, science doesn't just operate in a vacuum, and it does if we don't include the general audience as well as the solutionary. So an event like this is always really important, not only fun. So I'm the executive director of Plastic Ocean Project, and we're here in Wilmington, North Carolina, and basically do research around the globe. Most recently work done in Alaska. And so we're looking for plenty of opportunities to collaborate with others. And that also means focusing on solutions. So our motto is education through research, outreach through art, and solutions through collaboration. So thank you all for having me tonight, and let's go to the next.
All right, thanks, Bonnie. Amber, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your work.
Hi, yeah, my name's Amber. I'm a grad student at the University of California, Santa Barbara's Bren School of Environmental Science and Management, and my specialization is in coastal marine resources management. I've done a little bit of work this year with the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary on marine debris projects like cleaning up lost fishing gear from the Channel Islands, installing fishing line recyclers at local beaches, piers, and lakes. And then most recently trying to get started with an outreach campaign to local high schools and throughout the university to reduce plastic, specifically with balloons at like graduations and campus events. And then another part of my master's program, we're working on developing a tool for VC firms to better assess the environmental impact of small kind of startup businesses. So, and what I'm looking forward to most is hearing from other scientists about their research, and then also kind of the process that some of these vendors are going through and trying to make their products more sustainable and ocean friendly, and kind of maybe some of the barriers that they've faced in that process and how we can overcome them together.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for noting that. That's one of my favorite things I always get from these events, is getting to hear from the vendors about, you know, what do you need from science? What do you need to know about so you can move forward and make your business more sustainable? And what are you already doing, and what's going great about it? So with that, the vendors will go ahead and start with Shell. If you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your business and what you do.
Sure. Hi. Thank you for having me. Nice to be here. We are not a business. So Sea Hugger is a nonprofit. So we're kind of unusual. We're a nonprofit combating marine plastic pollution through education and action. And it just sort of happened. We realized how are people going to, avoid plastic if they don't have the tools, the reusables that people need. And a lot of them, we all own regular silverware, but how fun is it to have, your set in a pouch with a cleaner and all these neat products that exist. So we don't create any products of our own. We brand a lot of things like the Swedish dishcloths and bamboo coffee cups and things like that. And then we have our own like merchandise, 100% organic hoodies, cotton hoodies and things like that with our brand. And all of the money goes to support our programs. So we're a little bit unique.
That's awesome. I love to hear about that. Also, I'm stoked to meet you today because I actually bought some of your dishcloths for one of my Everblue team members. She moved into a new house and I thought it would be a good housewarming gift. So it's good to finally meet the person who supplied those.
Oh, thank you.
All right, Emily, we'll go ahead and go to you if you want to introduce yourself. Tell us about your business or organization and what you do.
Sure. Hi, I'm Emily. I'm based out of San Diego, and I'm the owner and creator of my sustainable clothing line, Impulse. And I started the brand about a little over 4 years ago, and I've been full-time with it for about 2 years now. And so I started by upcycling clothing, which is still predominantly a big part of the brand. And I also use dead stock fabrics and plant dyes. But yeah, I pretty much run the show and slowly getting help with production and looking forward to chatting more and maybe finding some answers to all of the barriers that I hit.
Absolutely. Well, hopefully we'll be able to provide you with some answers or even with a couple contacts to reach out to and try to figure out where we can move forward.
Cool.
All right. So with that, we would love to get to start to have the panelists answer some of the submitted questions that we've had. And these are some questions that Clarissa and Lauren have been collecting from our audience and questions that Clarissa and myself had for the panel. And so I'll just go ahead and start off with a few of those. And then we can just kind of riff off of that. If you've been a part of one of these events before as a panelist, you know that sometimes the discussions can trail and sidetrack and go on tangents, and we love it when that happens because we get to have great discussions about the things we're passionate about and the questions that we have. So don't ever feel like you can't talk about something just because it wasn't in the question. So one of the first questions that we have for both the scientists and the vendors is, how does sustainability play a role in your research and your work? So if anyone would like to start off on that question, how does sustainability play a role in your work? Then go ahead.
I'm happy to say something. Sustainability is at the core of everything we do. It would be rather hypocritical of us, we feel, to cut corners. And we are a relatively new organization, been around almost 4 years. And in that, we've refined our merchandising, because we felt like it didn't check all the boxes. We've actually are offering fewer bamboo products because we know most of it's coming from China, and it's a monocrop, probably using pesticides. Who knows what kind of labor practices they have. We just can't get enough information about it to know if we can legitimately say this is sustainable. If it's not transparent to us, then we can't turn around and tell you, oh, bamboo is sustainable, which, that statement is true, but are we saying that this particular bamboo utensil that we are selling has been vetted? No, we aren't comfortable saying that. So like now we're actually switching out to utensils that are made from returned blades from Albatross Sailing, the razor company. So they did a take-back program for their razor blades, and they make metal utensils, which is awesome. However, my daughter just went on a trip and they took them away from her at TSA. So not a perfect solution, but you do the best you can. So for me, it's all about, I guess, credibility, sustainability. To say that, I need to be 100% sure that it is.
Yeah, and I'd love to piggyback off of that. So what I like to do is go to the scrapyard. It sounds like a strange place to look for things, but lots of times when restaurants go out of business, they'll leave their silverware utensils there. And so you can get them really cheap and repurpose them. So we made to-go packages for, the to-go ware out of repurposed fabric. And then we just put the fork, spoon, knife in that. And we sell that as a fundraiser. And then another example of what we do to kind of live by the reuse or reduce law of necessity, we do cleanups. We do a lot of cleanups. We have a program called Trees for Trash. And instead of using single-use bags, we have reusable bags that are mesh. And so the sand can go through them when we do beach cleanups. And then we clean them every time, and then reusable gloves. And we also took the tennis ball containers, and we attached them so that the cigarette butts can go inside that, as well as any sharp objects, glass, hypodermic needles, and it has a lid so that way we keep our people safe from those objects, could potentially hurt someone. So those are just a couple of examples of how we do what we do in the reusable world.
I love that you're always, oh, go ahead, Lauren.
I was gonna say, you should trademark that bag and make it an actual product. Like tools and everything on it.
Right. Full scissors.
I love that
our business degree. We're like, you gotta trademark that. Like, hurry.
Out of it. Yeah.
That's
how we have to think, right? I mean, that's how we create change, because I like to tell young people that, the goal is to make a difference and make a living, right? We can't just make a difference because we've got to eat. So, right, what we're talking about today is about how you can make a difference and make a living, which is the future. I'm real excited about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love how you always think about, even though your nonprofit by itself, just by the work you do, is moving towards sustainability, because you're researching different plastics, you're doing these cleanups, but even within that, you're trying to think, okay, but how can we make our work itself more sustainable? And that's something that I know a lot of my friends in science are doing, because a lot of the materials and equipment that's used in research labs is even not terribly sustainable in itself. And so I know a lot of people who are thinking like, okay, but how many gloves do we actually have to use here? Can we still, can we still be safe in the lab, but not trying to use as many plastics. Shel, I'm really interested in your talk about, oh wait, Lauren, you just put your hand up. I can save my question for a second.
I mean, it was kind of going to be a riff off question, so you can choose whether you want to use it or not. In terms of being sustainable, everything has trade-offs. So how do you evaluate trade-offs? And actually this question was going to be more for Amber, because I'm very curious, and correct me if I'm wrong, but if you create an evaluation for VCs on small businesses and their impact, like is trade-off, are trade-offs calculated into that? How is, like, I don't know. That was just kind of a broader question on trade-offs.
Yeah, it's been really interesting for me. And when I hear the word sustainability, and when I saw the question, how does this play into the research and work right now, kind of the point in our like research in developing this tool, which is essentially a questionnaire, both quantifiable and quantitative kind of questions for companies, because a lot of small companies don't have the resources to do like a full LCA or get third-party audited, et cetera. So we're really looking at those trade-offs. If your product's more circular, using less resources, but it's flimsier, and so it's not as durable, so people are going through them more quickly. The most interesting question that we are looking at with like circularity and sustainability is like rebound effects. So, the idea that there's not necessarily a 1-to-1 ratio. Just because somebody buys your sustainable shirt, it's not necessarily displacing one entire, less sustainable shirt. So coming up with trying to quantify the displacement metric and what's the counterfactual, what does the world look like without your product? So it's would somebody be buying nothing, which would be way more sustainable than buying something, even if it is, plastic free or whatnot. So we're definitely looking at a lot of those trade-offs, which are things that I hadn't really thought about before doing like this deep dive into the literature and what's out there. What would be like a specific example in terms of what you had questions about with trade-offs? Like, is it, like using something that's a little bit more resource intensive, but it's local, so the greenhouse gases to ship it or less, or like, what is your kind of, I'm going to throw the question back at you. What's your idea of like trade-offs that you encounter?
I mean, it depends on what you're looking at, but like, for example, are you looking at greenhouse gases? Are you looking at plastic? Are you looking at circularity? So it really depends on what category you're focused on. And Clarissa and I do this all the time when we do our sustainability calls. We always say unfortunately, you can't be perfect in all categories at the moment, and there's always going to be trade-offs. So it's for each business, it's kind of what are you focused on? What is dear to your company values? And then take that into account.
And an example of that would be, I know I don't want to call them out because they're not here, but I'm not speaking poorly on on them, but Surf Dirt, one of the surf sunscreens that we work with, they, for example, something that was really important for them was using organic produced products and family-owned farms. And with the zinc and everything that they have to use to produce this product, and they found the perfect farm, but it was located in Kenya. And so if you're looking at like, what are the qualifications of, this product, but how the distance it has to travel and the carbon footprint that kind of takes up that space. But, if you're looking at human impact, the fact that you're supporting a family-owned farm and there's no, labor abuses and that sort of thing. And then the fact that you have this like really circular nature in terms of, if you have the beeswax and, you have all these other products. So at what point you're like, you're good to go. Like the trade-off is you can't win in all the categories, but like you have checked off enough to kind of like pass the test. And that's what Lauren and I do on these sustainability calls all the time. It's like at a certain point, like you can spend all of your energy trying to find like the most perfect product and production line and manufacturing system. But at the end of the day, you're not going to have a complete carbon neutral system with like completely organic products with like no plastic in any sort of your production. Like it's really virtually impossible to be perfect in every category. So that's an example.
Yeah, I think kind of to your point, it is, there's literature and there's quantifiable kind of numbers you can put behind everything, but maybe from a business perspective, it is a bit of a philosophical question, and it is kind of what are your priorities? And with the development of our tool, which is going to be kind of like a weighted questionnaire, we're making it open source, and we're working with the VC firm specifically that's like our client, and they're really focused on the idea of circularity and waste reduction and materials and toxics, basically. So we're weighting those questions more heavily for them and their interests in their investments and their risk management. But the way that we're developing the tool will be so that other kind of VC firms or even companies can use it, and they can reweight based on kind of what they find more important. We're providing all our methods and like analysis with the numbers for why we chose to weight things certain ways. And so people can have some background on the numbers and kind of, why we weight one thing as more impactful to the environment versus the other. But ultimately, we will have it set up so that companies can choose, there's gonna be different sections, and they can weight kind of based on what they find important and their philosophies.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think I run into the trade-offs thing a lot in terms of communication, because people always want to know, what's the best product? What's the best thing I can get? Like, what's the thing that's going to be most ocean friendly? And when you really get into it, it kind of gets into a rabbit hole, because like Shell, you were saying earlier, you're like, oh, okay, well, bamboo is better than single-use plastic. But then you start to look into bamboo and you go, wait a minute, I don't know if it is. And so then you start to get into this rabbit hole of like, oh my goodness, well, what is actually ocean friendly and what is actually sustainable? And a lot of people I talk to just kind of throw their hands up. They're like, we can't win. It's like, yes, on one hand, you could look at it that way. But on the other hand, it's like, to me, that's almost like, okay, but if nothing is like perfectly sustainable, then we just need to try and look towards what's best, because we know that just like living on the earth using materials, we are going to at points be not sustainable in our lifetime. And so for me, it's all about like trying to evaluate, like you said, those trade-offs. It's like, okay, well, what do we want to try and work with here? Shelley, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I wanted to say, so when you said, you throw your hands up, and, I think that's a reaction that we're seeing more and more. People are, they have, sustainability fatigue or climate anxiety. And so what we try and encourage, through our messaging is, start small, definitely reuse. Reusables are really the only way to go, but start small and make some simple changes. So you don't feel overwhelmed, because we don't want people to give up. And then that's kind of another role we have, is to try and help people. And we do have a marketplace, similar to Sea Blue, but where we vet different brands and have little icons, so that we kind of do the work for people. So they can go there and say, oh, okay, these are things that are important to me. This is, plastic free, or this is cruelty free, or, this is made, in the United States, not transported across the ocean. So then people can make their own decisions. But it was definitely overwhelming, and it's overwhelming for kids too. So we wrote a children's book, and it has ways for kids to be a part of the solution, and encourage them to not, be overwhelmed, and to just that even little people can make a difference.
Yeah, totally. I love that. And I love the idea of putting almost like the buttons next to your different products. You're like, this one's this, this one's this, this one's this. There's no product that will hit every single one of those buttons, but you can make your own decisions, and you're almost like empowering them with the knowledge of what is what, so they can choose. Emily, you got your hand up? There we go.
There we go. Just something my sister told me, actually, she's in environmental policy, because it can be, I just wanted to speak to like how overwhelming it can be to like try to be perfect in every element. Because that's where I struggle. I have like crazy high standards for my project or my products. And just, I feel like knowing that it's going to be like an ongoing research project, like I feel like that's what my brand is. It just is a research project. And there is like just always more innovations like coming up. So just like, I don't know, I think having that mindset too helps to when you don't feel like your products are all perfect and checking everything off. the list.
Oh, I love that. And I love that you connected it too. Like, you're like, my project is research. I'm learning as we go. Bonnie, you got your hand up?
Yeah, Maya Angelou has a great quote, and it says, do better. And when you learn to do better again, right? So it's like, don't put so much pressure on being perfect, but just try to make steps in the right direction. And we know a lot more than most people. And that's why, not putting so much pressure about being perfect, just do better. And then when you learn to do better, do it better again. It's such a great quote. We have it on our website.
Oh, I love that. And also it really speaks to the fact that, in industry, like Emily, you said, you're constantly learning about new things that come out and new innovations that can make your products more sustainable. But even with science, like, there's the same concept, because even when something gets published in a paper, there's still an ongoing research process, and there's always ongoing conversation. And so having an understanding, we always like to try and teach people when we're teaching about science, it's like, hey, this is information that's available, but it's also always an ongoing conversation. So there's always going to be more information. There's always going to be more things to learn. So you learn, and then you hold it loosely, and then you learn the next thing, and then you move on from there. Amber, I had a question specifically for you about a couple different things you brought up in your notes. So I'm not a business circularity person. I'm a marine scientist by trade. And so what is an LCA? And can you tell us about rebound effects for anyone in the audience who isn't familiar with that language, such as myself? I would love to know a little bit more about those topics.
Sure, yeah, and LCA, and I apologize because I'm working with people who know a lot more about this than I do, who throw out these acronyms all the time, and I have to forget that they should be defined. It stands for a life cycle assessment. So that is looking at 6 different kind of environmental impact categories, and looking at it, and usually it's done by a certified professional, and companies pay a lot of money to have it done. And basically they run through and do kind of from production to like end of life, what the impact of that product is. So it's like a very intensive kind of analysis of not just what are the materials, but what is and you can compare it to kind of the baseline for like the industry, and look to see whether that product has like a greater or lesser impact than kind of the industry baseline. I'm not an LCA expert, but that's kind of my take on what an LCA is. And then in terms of rebound effects, looking at circularity and the concept of rebound effects would be like one example that's pretty easy to understand is electric or hybrid vehicles that they increase fuel efficiency, which kind of at a surface level would seem to reduce environmental impact, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But then if people are using the cars more and more because they don't have to pay as much for gas, and they're driving it farther, they're going on road trips, they move farther away from their office, and then that hybrid electric vehicle maybe isn't reducing the impact because people are just using it more. So that would be, and that's something that we see pretty often with like greener products, is that they can often have the rebound effect of just increasing consumption. And time again, we see that, consumption is outpacing our efficiencies, unfortunately.
Okay, that's really interesting. So it's not only looking at like the sustainability of a product itself, but it's almost like encouraging people to buy more of the product, which is the opposite of where we want to go. That's so interesting. Okay, Lauren.
I'm curious, what other examples are there for the rebound effect besides like where you see that consumption is on the rise?
The other one would be like switching to LED or more efficient lighting systems. They see that people will switch to some like more efficient form of lighting, and then their electrical bills will go down, so they're not thinking about turning the lights off, and they're just they're finding efficiencies so that they can consume more, and that's just another example.
Yeah, it's I actually never thought about it in that way, but it makes absolute sense.
Yeah. And so for our panelists who have their own products products that they're working with, how could something like a life cycle assessment, or like thinking about the rebound effects, how could that help them, or how do you think that could help them with maybe assessing the sustainability of their products?
Yeah, maybe on a smaller scale without having to, invest in doing a whole life cycle assessment. Just kind of doing a little bit of research in the literature of what kind of the marketplace looks like, what, competitors are doing, what people might just kind of thinking and pondering about, what, consumers would be doing if they weren't buying your product, what are kind of more are there any other options that are more environmentally friendly than your product? And, how can you adjust your product to meet that or to match that? And I think that also just having answers for consumers too. I think that providing education with your products. So if you can make your product more durable, for example, so it lasts longer, and maybe knowing the answer if somebody asks how many times would somebody need to use your product for it to basically equal out the amount of consumption required to make your product. So let's say you have a fork, how many times would somebody have to use your metal fork to displace the 100 plastic forks, and what would the overall, what we call a net green effect. So if you can look, and I can provide some questions that might help, but if you can kind of assess what would be the net impact of your product versus the leading alternatives, then that's helpful to think about.
That's really interesting that you mentioned like trying to see what other brands are doing, because it's almost like trying to match the industry standard. Shell, you have a comment or a question?
Yes. I don't know if this is considered rebound effect, but one of the so the byproduct of reusables is you have to wash everything, right? Like, and in our house, we switched to, reusable napkins even. And here in California with the water shortage, I know a lot of people are concerned about what is, best, what's the lesser of two evils. And it's confusing. A lot of people think, well, if I buy something and then I recycle it, isn't that saving water? But, it's all about sharing and educating with them that the amount of resources that recycling actually consumes, and even the bioplastics that everyone thinks are the answer, which are such a miss. But how much water is used to create that crop that's then turned into that bioplastic, so it's complex, and we find it even just people don't want to read a long list of why. So it's challenging, but I think just engaging with people, even one-on-one, to explain the process, or if we visit classrooms, explaining them to a classroom makes a difference, and then each of those people hopefully can go off and share the message, sort of that domino effect. But I know here in California, the reusables water is one of the biggest kind of comebacks we get to people when we encourage them to switch, especially restaurants, and especially if they don't have, a lot of them got rid of their dishwashers. That's a whole nother issue.
Yeah, interesting. I hadn't, I'm currently based in Arizona because I'm doing some training for a job here. And it's short term, but there's definitely like the water issue is so much bigger here than other states that I've lived in before. And it's interesting to kind of like add into the discussion, like you're saying, people are like, okay, so you have reusables, but what about washing them? Bonnie?
Yeah, I just wanted to add the water thing. When I think about like the practicality of some of that, right? So if we're going to use napkins, you're going to wash your clothes, right? So you're going to throw in like 6 napkins, right? Is that going to change the load size? So I think sometimes the water angle gets a really bad rap, especially here when we don't have a water issue, but we switched to styrofoam trays so that we were saving water. And really, water is recycled. It's this thing like you use it once and it's gone. I know that it's different in places like where you are, Ellie, and California, but to lump it all into saving water, sometimes I think that gets a really stretched out a little too far.
Agree.
Yeah. Amber, go ahead.
I was just going to say a good, and I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but if you could then tell people how much water is required to recycle something, or how much water is required to produce a plastic fork or to produce a paper towel, then, that can shut down that argument pretty quickly.
Yeah, totally. Lauren?
Yeah, I wish there was like a chart or something, whatever, an app or whatever it may be, that kind of really, you can put in what you're using and it kind of gives you the breakdown of the impact it has. That would be so helpful, because I feel like everyone just, that's where you stop, that's where you stop as a consumer, and you're like, there's too many factors that play into this. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing because that's what I know, what I'm like, at least I know the product. I'm not going to switch to a new one that may or may not even be better.
I remember going to a conference one time and they had done life cycle assessments on different types of food or something similar to life cycle assessments. I just remember seeing like actual graphs on how much water, energy, whatever it takes to like make a block of cheese or like a can of beer or like a pound of meat or something like that. And it was so interesting to see all of the graphs. I was like, God, I wish we could like just press a button and like do that for every single product that we have. But we're not that advanced yet, maybe in the next like decade or something, we could figure that out. Tap a button at the grocery store and get to see the life cycle assessment of the product you're buying. But Clarissa?
Yeah, I want to just throw this in here, and I don't know if it's like throwing us a little bit off topic, but I feel like we're talking almost like through the lens of the consumer. Like when you go to the store, you're like, what do I even buy? Like what makes the most sense if I'm going to buy these forks, do I need to wash them and like plastic and and like you're faced with like this multitude of choice, which is a consumer problem in the United States generally. But how do we like turn that conversation to be more of a, let's put this on the businesses, let's put this on the individuals that are producing product, so that this like overwhelming sense of misinformation and like confusion and not sure, which process and which product we buy as a result of water and location and everything, then like how can we make sure that the businesses that are producing the products are producing products that are aligned with everything that we're talking about? And and that's definitely something that we're trying to do with Sea Blue, is to kind of slowly integrate these efforts into businesses to take that pressure off the consumer, because it's very overwhelming. But it's definitely, it's not a one size fits all, and it's a long progress. And I know that Shell probably also has some thoughts on this as well, because she's in this industry.
Yes, yeah, I would like to add that you hit the nail on the head. It shouldn't be a consumer issue anymore. It really shouldn't. And I think people are finally realizing that. And here in our state, we had 2 bills passed and Governor Newsom signed them. And it was such a celebratory thing. And one was the Extended Producer Responsibility Act, AB something, and that, of course, implementing that is a whole nother issue that's going to be really challenging. But at least it was passed. And why are we paying to clean up the mess made by Unilever and Coca-Cola and all of these brands? They have the brand audits every year, and every year it's the same billionaire companies. Why are we paying to clean up their mess? And then the other one was the Truth in Recycling, and that's really exciting. And that's where they're going to actually have labels that are accurate. Brand companies can't just put a triangle on it and say, oh, it's recyclable, because it's not. And more and more of these recycling facilities are refusing certain materials, especially smaller ones, and it's super confusing. So that's really exciting, and I think that's where we have to go. It shouldn't be a consumer issue. It really shouldn't.
Yeah, well, it's did you say truth and recycling?
Truth in recycling.
Truth in recycling. Remind me, what state are you in? California as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
okay.
I can send
so
you
cool.
the information about the bill.
I know. I'm definitely going to do some reading on those.
Yeah, it's the first in the nation, and we're hoping that other states will follow.
Awesome. Bonnie, you got some thoughts?
Yeah, I just wanted to add the Break Free from Plastic Act that has been going around and around. It hasn't gotten through yet, but we all need to be really pushing that, because that's exactly where it's headed, with removing the consumer responsibility to corporate responsibility on these products. And so right in line with what true California, always leading the charge, and the rest will follow. And it's really exciting. And if the fact that you pulled that off in your state, it's the ripple effect. It was like gay rights, right? It had to start somewhere with just a couple states, at the forefront pushing it through, and now it's not even much of a thing anymore. So that's where it all starts. But we have to be the advocates, to our political leaders, put the pressure on them. Most recently, we got our city to sign a resolution to reduce their use of plastic. They did buy some reusable paper washable bags. And this was just in an effort because we can no longer have a bag ordinance in our state. The same people that say they don't want big government has made big government tell us that we don't have the right to ban or put any fees on plastic bags or any bags. So, working with your local leaders, you can talk to them and you'd be surprised how they are on your side, or there's ways to convince them to become greener. And so we're really proud of that resolution that we were able to pass in our community.
That's awesome.
Again?
Say again?
What state are you in again?
Oh, North Carolina.
Wilmington.
It's interesting, this conversation that we've moved to it. If you've talked to me at all before about sustainability and responsibility, and Bonnie, I know you've heard me say this before, but I love the question of like, who is, just like the thought question of like, who's most responsible for like cleaning up plastic per se? Is it individuals? Is it industry? Is it policymakers? And, I think what I've kind of come to at the end of all of it is like, we have to move all of them forward simultaneously. But I love, Clarissa, earlier, you're like, oh, I wonder how we're going to try and move the conversation more towards having industry be responsible for talking about the sustainability of their products. And just as a plug to Sea Blue, I think that's what you guys are doing. And that's why I love working with you. And I'll step off my soapbox. Amber, did you have something to say?
Yeah, I was going to echo, I think the policy is probably the number one solution there. But I think the question was, how can we as vendors help the consumer to make those decisions? And I think that, if there is any way to provide third-party verification or certification that helps to reduce some of the ambiguity for the consumer of, is this true? Is this greenwashing? Is this just a marketing ploy? Or have they had a professional person actually verify this? So that's just kind of, I know it's not accessible for all small brands that are kind of working their way up, but if that is something that is accessible, you can look at the requirements in order to get certain certifications.
Yeah, Shell?
We are hoping at Sea Hugger, we're not going to be able to certify materials. We're, not chemists, but we want to have a Sea Hugger approved, where we have, a list of 7 or 8 things, which Sea Blue definitely has, things that are important, and we vet them and then let people know. And so that's something we're kind of working on, because I think it is really confusing for the consumers. And that's kind of what we want to do, is make it easy, because if you reduce the impediments, then people will do it. If it's too hard, even if they really, really want to, they're not going to do it.
Totally. I think that's such an important thing that we always have to remember, is just when it comes down to it, if a choice to be more sustainable is easy, then people will do it. And if it's more difficult, then the desire that people have to move towards that choice, it just plummets. Clarissa?
I was just going to add, affordability and accessibility is huge in that conversation. And I think that's something that we have not figured out because it's oftentimes more expensive to create products that align with your values. If you're paying workforce fairly, if you are sourcing products from organic sources, like it's just going to be more it's going to be more expensive. And so that's going to just be an uphill battle unless we come up with some sort of quick solution, because fast fashion and fast products and fast everything is so affordable. And so how can we simultaneously convince people to purchase less, and also convince them that, you know, this item that is more expensive than, you know, something, an alternative on a shelf somewhere, is actually going to last you longer. So the cost over time is going to be less expensive than the product that's cheaply made. But that's such a large education piece, and that's something that will take time for sure.
Well, I also wonder if a lot of it has to do with, you know, educating people on durability as well. Because a lot of the times products that are made with better materials will last longer. And so then when you compare the cost, like it might be a more expensive one-time cost, but last you longer. And we got a question from the audience, but Emily, I'll go ahead and let you chime in first, and then we'll pop to our audience question.
Yeah, just as you were talking about fast fashion, I kind of like got cut out there.
Oh, you're muted. Go ahead and there you go. You're good.
Just like touching on the point of just like education for our consumers about quality over quantity. It's just like such a mindset, I think, change, and I think it's slowly becoming more apparent. But yeah, I think the higher cost for that quality is hard to get over that barrier, but hopefully with education for the consumers, yeah, it will be more of a shift here.
So
I just wanted to pop in really quick, because Emily actually does a really great job at educating her consumer base on her process.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah. And I just wanted to kind of give her a little bit of a platform here, that she plant dyes so many of her products, her clothing line and all of that. She upcycles, and she really kind of gives everyone a window into her shop, which is a really cool experience for anyone who I'll pop her kind of, if you want to do it too, Emily, your little Instagram handle, but it's a really cool way to kind of start to understand how we can slowly make this shift into, you know, upcycling products, and fashion can change. But Emily, if you want to add anything, go for it.
Oh, she might have frozen again.
Okay.
We love internet problems. Such a fun thing to deal with Zoom. You know what? As long as I could see your faces, I'm happy. We'll wait for her to pop back on and answer that question. But while we're waiting for her, let's go ahead and switch to our audience question. Colleen asked, how do we currently think that we can make sustainable consumption more affordable? So if anyone has any thoughts about that.
Well, I think that's the beauty of reusables. It's a one-time purchase. I mean, you think you buy a water bottle and it's, you know, even a high-end one, $35, $40, you know, how you don't buy all those cases of water, you know, at the grocery store or while you're out, which can get really expensive, you know, at events. And it's awesome that a lot of venues are now allowing you to bring in your own water bottles now. And there's this really great movement by the music industry to create, you know, to force venues to allow people to bring in their own bottles, because, you know, music events are a huge source of single-use plastic waste. So it's really exciting to see the reusables start to catch on, because it does save everyone money.
Yeah, absolutely. Bonnie, you've had your hand up for a bit. You could comment on whatever part of the discussion you happen to.
Yeah, I wanted to circle back to Emily, because it's really trending. I work with a lot of college students and high school students, and just, you know, they're thrifting, they're coming up with ways to take clothes and kind of tailor them into their own style. And in fact, I have some ninth graders that are working on a trash and fashion show. And it would be so awesome, Emily, if I could have you talk to these kids. There's 4 or 5 of them working on creating their own event. There's going to be a whole catwalk thing and categories. And so, but, you know, you're such a great example of what I was saying, you know, how can you make a difference and make a living? And you're such a great example of that, especially with these students that care about fashion, but they don't want to buy into the fast fashion. So really, really awesome that you're doing that. And, you know, I'd love to see if I could get you in front of the students.
Bonnie, I think she froze for like half of your.
Yeah, that's totally fine. I was going to pop in and say, Emily, Bonnie was just saying how much she loves your business model, and she is wanting to see if you would maybe come and chat with some of her students sometime who are really interested in sustainable fashion.
Yeah, totally. I'm always down to chat more about sustainable fashion, and it's always, a research project. I try to go from a bunch of different avenues to come up with different sustainable ideas to create. And when I can't figure something out, I just plant dye. Like right now, I'm just like hitting a wall with trying to figure out about what this low impact dyes mean. And so I'm pretty just focused on transparency. And if I can't figure out something that makes sense to me, I just go a different route. So
yeah, I would love to hear, Emily, about like when you say you're doing some research on trying to find out how to make your product more, you might have frozen again. Oh, shoot.
Oh.
Okay, we'll wait for her to pop back on. I want to know about her research. Okay, we'll figure it out. But I love to hear that she's, always just trying to figure out the next thing and being transparent along the way. And Shell, do you have any comments as to, some of the research that you do on your products, and like, what's your process like for that? I'm really curious.
Sure. We have 6 or 7 criteria that we use. And it's, of course, nothing plastic, and then ocean friendly, non-toxic, PFAS that's a huge problem with those forever chemicals, cruelty-free, sustainable, sourced. Where is it sourced? We, of course, as an ocean conservation organization, we don't like to have too many things shipped overseas. There's so many, mammal strikes, whale strikes, and it's, plus the emissions from all the shipping, there's just a plethora of issues involved with that. So we sustainably source. And then for us, do they give back? Is the company a B Corp? Are they 1% for the planet? Those are the things that are important to us as a nonprofit. We like to support other businesses that are giving back. And also that's what the consumer is wanting as well. And it's really exciting. And it's super encouraging to see these, activist investors that are infiltrating these, even the big oil companies and kind of forcing them to make a difference, because that's what the public is wanting. So as much as a little while ago, I was saying this shouldn't be a consumer issue, I actually think it's awesome that consumers are involved and they're demanding things, because that's where change is going to happen.
Yeah, I love that. Emily, now that you're back, I would love to hear a little bit more about the research process that you do to look into different sustainable methods that you could use for your production.
Yeah. Sorry, this internet keeps cutting out on me. But I pretty much go like deep into the belly of LA to like figure stuff out. Cause I just I hit up like fabric people. My latest thing basically is trying to figure out dyes, and like people can never give me answers about like what makes something non-toxic. I'm also not a chemist. So, but I like the first year I was in business, I went into the LA fashion district, went to dye houses, talked to people literally dyeing the clothes right there, which was super gnarly. But I pretty much go direct to the production teams to talk to them about that. I also listen to a lot of podcasts too, which is helpful, just like hearing what other sustainable brands' experiences have been. And then a lot of research on the different types of fabric, which you can pretty much find online. And I've developed a lot of blogs that people can read to figure out what are kind of some sustainable options. So I think fabric and ingredients is a big part of my research, and just trying to find a team to help me sew. which I have found, but like they weren't like a hundo. So still kind of on the search for that. Yeah.
Nice. So what, I'm curious, just going even deeper into the rabbit hole, you said sometimes with the dyes and stuff, people can't give you answers. What do you do when you get to a roadblock like that, or like an end of the road?
I keep dying with plants, but
fair enough.
Yeah, just kind of keep going these other routes. But I honestly, my next step was trying to talk to some scientists, chemist people that can help me kind of understand what a bunch of jargon on the internet means. Because it's not, I have a hard time understanding what like certifications mean. I know consumers certainly would. So yeah, that's definitely something I kind of, definitely need help figuring out.
I actually know a couple scientists at Oregon State University who work with toxicity in nanoplastics. And so they might not be able to directly answer your question, but they're involved with a national group that does like toxicity assessments. And so they'll definitely know someone.
Yeah.
So that's usually how I get answers, is like, okay, so I know someone who probably has another contact. So I'll get you connected with them and get you their emails, because they would love to help you with that.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, fun. Sorry, I got distracted thinking about getting you connected with their emails. Oh, I love hearing about the research that you guys do as brands into looking at your different products. And so you said that that's one thing you're looking for from scientists, is learning a little bit more about toxicity, but are there any other things that are particular roadblocks for you in your businesses that you need more information on to be more sustainable, or to move towards more sustainable options?
I think finding the people. I mean, just I wish we're only working with small little, women owned, minority owned businesses, local, family owned, mom and pop, whatever. I would love that, but it's like, how do you find them? It's, again, it's that process. And fortunately in the sustainability world, everyone's always willing to share information with each other. And so that's been helpful. But yeah, it would be great to have, I guess, a big clearinghouse of vendors, because it's hard to locate them.
Yeah. Emily?
I don't know. There are some different platforms you can use I think this might just be for the fashion industry. But there is a platform, for example, called Threefold. It's like THRE, the number 3. I can send up a link, but they basically find factories that are vertically integrated. So all the way from the farming of the material all the way through cut and sew process, and they can link you up. I haven't gone that route just because they are not domestic, so kind of like a trade-off, but it's something that I don't know, I would be interested in looking into, and maybe there are other platforms out there for something other than just fashion too. I don't know though.
Yeah, well, that would help, because we do have t-shirts and hoodies and hats and beanies, and thank you.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to figure out how to add links to the messages.
Cool.
I think I can do it though.
Okay, so I'm in need of another definition from the production side. Emily, you said vertically integrated. What exactly does that mean in the production world?
Okay, I could be totally wrong, but I just kind of learned this term the other day because I was talking to this the production facilitator of this platform, and it's, from my understanding, it's kind of from basically ground all the way to the finished product. So it's helps with traceability, where the cotton is being grown, and maybe that it is actually organic cotton all the way to the cut and sew of the factory. So kind of is the full, because that's a big problem in the fashion industry. People be it's made in ethical working conditions. Okay, well, how was it grown? So it's just a full integration from crop to the garment.
Got it. So basically knowing every step of the process.
Mm-hmm.
That's really cool. That also probably takes a lot of effort to get
yeah,
to.
that's why I'm like, I'm into checking out this platform, but it is just the trade-off of it not being domestic, and I'm so used to having everything right here. So I don't know. Yeah.
Amber, is that something that you run into with some of your work? At least that sounded kind of similar to me in terms of doing like a life cycle assessment on a product.
Yeah, and specifically with us trying to develop this tool, we're trying to figure out what the scope is that we can even look at and like the small amount of time we have to work on this project. So ultimately we want to be able to, give these investors the best full picture of all the impacts that a potential investment can have, from, the sourcing of every material to the end of life, what the consumer does with the product after they're done using it. But we're kind of narrowing our scope down to just post-production. So like, how many times do you have to wash the product? How does it end up? Can it be recycled? Can it be reused? What does the consumer do? But yeah, that's definitely difficult to look at every step of the process because there's so many factors, and finding the data and the information about how much water does your, maybe in your example, does your fabric supplier use? I guess you're upcycling, so maybe not for you, but there's just so many different, data points that are really hard to get. So that's probably been one of the biggest barriers to understanding like the full life cycle impact is getting that data, and even, if the data exists, if they even have measured that. So yeah, definitely some barriers there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm excited. One of our other science panelists just came on. Stacy, it's so good to see you. I think I might have gotten the time zones mixed up with the time change this last week when we were sending emails, and so that's on me. But I'm so glad that you were able to show up. Right now, we're kind of getting to chat through tracing products and trying to figure out, the life cycle of a product, and being able to talk about how businesses can use that information to try and choose more sustainable materials. And actually, I was just talking about you and your research a little bit before this, because one of our vendor panelists was interested in learning more about toxicity of different products. And I said, oh, I know a toxicologist. So everyone, this is Stacy. And if you want to go ahead and give us a short introduction on some of your research and what you do, we'd love to hear about it.
Yeah, so I am a professor at Oregon State University. I have kind of a split appointment between environmental engineering and environmental molecular toxicology. The juxtaposition of those kind of things is that I study nanotoxicology. So all the cool stuff that we're inventing and making, headway on making new products and stuff, I will assess, any of the products that are developed for that fit your specific purpose, to make sure that they are, give you at least some information on the relative toxicity of those things. We can do that in pretty short order in our lab. And so I've been, working with a lot of different industries and such to make sure that happens. My research focus recently has kind of transitioned to nanoplastics. My bread and butter is in nanotoxicology. So when I was introduced to microplastics, I thought there's nanoplastics as well that aren't even being studied, but we need to understand what that potential impact might add to what we're already considering for the microplastics. So that's kind of where my recent work has been. And Ellie is awesome. She's been our science communication person that kind of translates all of the jargon and all of the technical details of what we're doing to everyday language that people can consume. And Ellie has also been training our students and the PIs in different areas on how to effectively do that communication. So I am very thankful to be invited to this event, and I'm really excited to talk with you all about different aspects.
Oh, good. Thank you for that introduction. And I'm going to go ahead and throw a link in the chat to the website of an organization that Stacy's been running for the last couple of years. And that's how she and I got involved. She runs this big science collaborative called the Pacific Northwest Consortium on Plastics. And so definitely everyone go check that out and get to see some of the great research and outreach that they're doing. Bonnie, you had your hand up?
I do. Hi, Stacy. So good to see you. I have a question about the technology you're using for the nanoplastics. What kind of instrumentation do you use for that?
It depends on what you're asking. If you're asking for material type, that's a different instrument versus the quantification versus the size scale. So those are really different questions and different instruments that we have to use.
I'll take any one of them. What kind of instrumentation do you use for size fraction? I'd be really interested in that. And then,
so for size fraction, so we in our lab, we've taken the approach of taking everyday consumer products and milling them down and testing for their toxicity relative to comparable, potential replacements and other products. And so in that part, when we're looking at the actual size distribution of them, we can use things like dynamic light scattering, where we can actually see and differentiate particle size. When they get down to a small enough level, we can use nanoparticle tracking analysis, but that requires that all of the particles in the system are kind of below a threshold level of 1 micron. And for those that are above that, when we're classifying microplastics, we can use traditional flow cytometry systems, where we can actually look at them as if they were cells, because they're kind of in that same size range. And so for size, that's how we categorize the particles.
Yeah, absolutely. Shell, you have a question?
Yes, I have a question for Stacy as well. Hi, Stacy. I'm Shell Cleve from Sea Hugger. We're a marine protection nonprofit based in Half Moon Bay, California. And do you study the effects of PFAS, or if they exist on the products you're testing?
We have not done that. So right now we're trying to look across like pristine plastics material classes. And we've kind of gotten through like our baseline data over the last year and a half plus, getting across baseline data to see if the plastics inherently themselves are toxic. We're now moving into number one, additives and stabilizers and plasticizers for those that seem to be problematic. But then also considering, all of the environmental contaminants that are going to sorb to those at different rates and may actually affect the way that they're transported through the environment and may, make themselves available to organisms in the environment. So, if you think about, particles or chemicals that might necessarily automatically go to the sediment, if they sorb to a particle that is, has less density than the water that they're in, they may be available in other compartments. And so we're trying to tease apart all of those things, but with the variety of plastics, it's very challenging, right?
Right. So second question then. So we do work on microplastics. Well, we have a C-bin that collects water and we examine it. But I know microplastics and nurdles, they're sticky, like they attract the toxins in the water, the soil, whatever. So nanoplastics, I mean, I would assume they would as well, even doesn't matter how small they are, they're still attracting toxins.
Yeah, and at the nanoscale, if you think about, you know, the relative surface area, if you think about particles this big, right? And then you shrink it down, the relative amount of, you know, surface area that's available to a contaminant to bind to is increased exponentially. And so there are those concerns as well, but they're just not well documented because we aren't even right now collecting water samples in the environment that are representative of any of the nanoscale, you know, plastics that might be out there.
So Stacey, I know you don't necessarily do work with PFAS, but I know Bonnie, you're fairly interested in talking about PFAS, and that was a pretty big issue in Wilmington. Was it 2 years ago with the?
Yeah, it was actually 3 years ago. We started finding the Gen X, which is either a byproduct or a product that's used for stick-free pans, right? So Teflon. So that's what it started with, but it turned out there were a whole lot more chemical compounds in our river. You know, we're downhill from everywhere. We're at the mouth of the Cape Fear River that goes right into the Atlantic. So it's just picking up all the different chemicals that are being released from different manufacturers along the way. So PFAS and PFOAs are unfortunately pretty prevalent in our water. So we really have to use reverse osmosis for our water because it's contaminated. And there's no filtration system that really gets them out, as many of you might know. So huge problem, and they're everywhere. I think every human on the planet has been tested, has PFAS and PFOAs in their bloodstream.
Yeah, absolutely. So Stacey, I mentioned that you had come up earlier in a discussion about some toxicology. And so Emily, one of our vendor panelists who's on today, who has her own sustainable clothing business, she was talking about how she's been doing some of her own research into the toxicology of different dyes. And so Emily, I wanted to ask you specifically, what's something that you're running into with trying to understand the toxicology of different dyes? Like, what's a specific question that you've been trying to answer?
Well, thanks, Ellie. So yeah, what I've been running into is a lot of companies are claiming to use non-toxic synthetic dyes. And so that's what I've really been researching to see what that means even. Is it non-toxic, or it's called low impact, and they're saying that it is non-toxic. So yeah, I've been trying to find information from people that are making the fabric and using the dyes, and they just say it's not harmful to the environment. Like there's no really like details. And then I've gone to some sites, I think it's called OTEC, where there are some type of certification, and I think I found one that just lists a bunch of like chemicals that aren't allowed in the dyes, but I'm just having a hard time translating into what I can understand and consumers can understand what low impact dyes is, and I haven't used them just because I don't understand them. So that's what I'm running into.
Yeah, I guess I saw this years ago. So we have at Oregon State University, we have a Linus Pauling Sciences Center, which is focused on kind of micronutrients and stuff like that. And they have been focused on that kind of question of the dye additives to food and that. I have not kept up with the literature, but I would say that as far as, you know, probably 4 years ago, that there's not been much definitive delineation of additives that are good or bad. I would say in clothing that you're probably much better off because you can look at studies on dermal absorption, right? Those are things, if you have something that is really, really, you know, hydrophilic that will want to stay in the water environment, you're not going to have a lot of uptake of that across dermal barriers. And so if it's in a clothing kind of source, I would say that that's probably less of a concern, unless there are additional additives in there that facilitate the uptake of that across.
Gotcha.
Okay. Yeah.
There does seem to be like different types of dyes that are more reactive to like the fibers, and yeah, I'm just trying to understand all the different, what everything means. And yeah,
you want something that, I mean, for fibers, you want something that binds very fast to your fiber, that is very stable once it's absorbed, right? Once it contacts that you have a good chemical reaction that allows it to stay.
Gotcha. Okay. That helps. I'll continue my research too, because yeah, there's definitely different types of low impact dyes, and yeah, how they react to the clothing.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I just have a follow-up question to that, because this is something that's come up in our conversations with our different vendors, is that in terms of, and again, I'm not, this isn't my field, so this is going to seem like a really simple question, but like two things. One, when you're washing clothes, what goes into, the gray water and eventually into our oceans, and does dye create any, any of the toxicity that would enter that? That's question A. And B, when your clothing ends up in a landfill and it slowly breaks down, what does dye do then in terms of like going into water? And thinking of this through the lens of like what ends up in the ocean in these two processes. I don't know if this is your field or not, but I'm just curious.
I would have to say that is such a very complex question. And I think that there are probably studies out there on little bits and pieces of that, but to piecemeal that all together into an answer for you, that would be really, really challenging. And it ultimately depends on, the polymer type, the dye type, the way that it's bonded, whether it's, a kind of a permanent bond, like a covalent bond, or whether it's ionic interactions where the dye just really wants to be associated with that, but under conditions that it doesn't like it, it will go away. So there's so many considerations in that. But I would have to say that if you focused on a more specific question, that would be completely answerable if you did laboratory studies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This is so interesting to me, because normally, I think about sustainability more on like such a large scale and like the actual products themselves, and like what products are more ocean friendly than others. And Stacey, I love that you're just taking it straight down to the molecular level, and you're saying, well, how are the dyes bonding with the polymers? And my brain's like,
no, yeah, and that's probably too much more information than you all need, but
no, that's awesome.
This is what follow up with any conversations, I'm game.
Absolutely. Well, and yeah, follow up is a great topic of conversation, and also a great little segue into me letting us know that we have about 10 minutes left. And I can't believe that we've just been able to riff off of one single question at the start, but since we've just got about 10 minutes left in our discussion, I want to open it up to any last burning questions that any of our science panelists have for our vendors, or any of our vendor panelists have for our scientists. And then of course, we'll be sharing this recording afterwards, and we'll make sure that we get each other's contact information. So if we want to continue these conversations and kind of dig deeper into questions, then there will definitely be opportunity for that.
I have a really general basic question. I'm just curious, in terms of, this is just for everyone, in your journey in building a more sustainable business and a more ocean-friendly business, and in your journey of kind of research and all the studies you've done with the work of your nonprofits and kind of in labs, how have these things changed your consumer habits? Coming up on like holidays and shopping, and like we're all just going to like consume massively. And I want to kind of bring this in a sense that's like, no one's perfect. And so I'm not trying to put anyone on the spot, but like maybe we could just go around and say like, what's one thing that you've changed as a result of the work that you do? Ellie, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, one thing that this was actually a research post that one of my team members wrote a couple months ago. And for those of you who aren't familiar with my nonprofit, we do almost a back and forth that we share research and then we share sustainability tips that directly apply to that research. And when my team member wrote this, one of his sustainability tips, he sent it in to me and he said, you know, this might be a little bit too kind of like vague, but I personally use it in my life. And so I read over it, and his tip was, you know, just to take that extra second in your day to think about what you're doing, even when something else might seem easier. So his example was specifically with like trying to figure out whether a material was able to go in the recycling. And so he used the example of envelopes that have like the little plastic window in it. And so he said, you know, his tip was just take that extra second to think about it, and to think about like why you're doing the little tiny, you know, supposedly menial things that you're doing. And so he's like, you could just take that envelope and throw it in the recycling and be like, it's paper, it's going in recycling. But he's like, if you think about it, if you stop and you think about it and you could go, actually, I think there's a better way to do this. And it'll take me maybe 5 seconds longer to just reach in and rip that little plastic thing out. And so that's something that I'm always kind of trying to add to my day to day and also in my consumer choices, is like taking that extra second to think about like, okay, this one thing might be easier. And it might be like right in front of my face, but what if I do a little bit more research, and like, what if I just take that extra second? And so that's a consideration that I've been trying to work more, is like listen to the voice in the back of my head that's being like, wait, there might be a better option. So with that, whoever wants to go next and talk about how their work impacts their own personal choices.
Actually, similar, I'll go real quick because it's really quick. Similar to what Ellie does, I kind of ask myself, like, do I actually need this? Like, what value does it add to my life? Is there another option out there? And usually the answer is probably no, you don't need it right now. Of course, that's not 100% of the time, but I try to ask myself that a lot.
Nice. I like that. Bonnie, you had.
I just want to give a holiday idea that I've done with my kids. So they're older, and recognizing that buying them stuff was just not something I wanted to buy into anymore. So I found an old Norman Rockwell book. There were little pictures 4x4. I ripped them out. I put, you know, glued a bow on each one of them. And then I put them on a tree. And then my kids had to take one down and look at it and see how it related to a memory that they had. And of course I was selective in the ones that I picked. And what transpired was not just a frenzy of ripping through packages, many of things that they probably would have taken back to the store, but this incredible sharing of memories. And of course, we were very competitive. So I left it wide open that if the one didn't tell a very good story, the other one could up that story. And then I would just give them some money, you know, a couple dollars. So it just became this game, but it was also provoking some laughter, tears, and it would go on for, you know, like an hour and a half instead of it being like 30 minutes and all the gifts were unwrapped. And I just would strongly urge, you know, that kind of thing, because my kids love it. We have a lot of fun with it. And because we can't remember from one year to the next, usually, you know, it could have been telling the same story each year and it doesn't matter because it's always good. So that's one way that we're celebrating that's not generating waste.
I love that idea. Shell, you want to go?
Yeah, I wanted to say we focus on microplastics with our organization. And so even though I think it's beautiful, as balloons are beautiful, balloons are taboo now, glitter. So we have a campaign against glitter. So anything I'm buying, wrapping, cards, whatever, if it has glitter on it, I try and avoid it. And also we have a giant bin of bags and bows, some of which do have glitter, but we've had them forever. Don't buy anything new, you know, and I reuse them every year. And it's kind of like a family joke again, like who got the, you know, the Rudolph bag, and who, you know, so it's kind of fun, like a fun little tradition that's a zero waste tradition, and just reusing the same old bags every year, and they become like, you know, little treasured memories.
Oh, I love that idea. Yeah, I know. I had a friend growing up whose grandmother would wrap their gifts in the same like really thick paper wrapping every single year. And now it's become this thing. They're like, that's just what we get, is the same wrapping every single year. And she's been doing it for their whole lives because it's just like so durable. All right. Anyone else who wants to share some thoughts about personal sustainability? Well, honestly, with that, yeah.
Oh no, I was just saying that I feel like there's so much to like, I'm just going through my life and like what I do, but with gift wrapping and stuff, reusing boxes and newspaper, and kind of, I mean, you can make it look nice, of course, but also like setting the bar a little bit lower on what the aesthetics are of the wrapping can sometimes help you out a little bit.
Yeah, I've got a friend who works for NOAA, and she's captain some of their ships, and she says they have all of these nautical maps that just get tossed when they're done using them. And so years ago she started like sending out these maps to people, and I've been using them for years because they're really thick and they're like,
that's cool,
and they look cool too, right? Because they're
cool.
These nautical maps, and it's just recycled materials. But before we get into, okay, so Colleen says, if you want to post links to your favorite sustainable products and websites for you to visit, go to Sea Blue. No, just kidding. I mean, do that. But yeah, if any of you want to go ahead and post links on your favorite products and websites and spread to friends and family. We also, Everblue does a blog post with Sea Blue every year, where we look at, we call it like our sustainable gift guide. And so you can keep an eye out for that. We usually publish it around the end of November. And also, while we are posting some of our favorite products into the chat, since we are wrapping up, if you are a business or a nonprofit, please put your URL or your social media into the chat right now. And if you're a scientist, if you use social media, if you have a website for your research, a website for your nonprofit, go ahead and toss it all in the chat so anyone who's in the audience can get to connect with all of us past this event. And as people are throwing all of their URLs in, I just want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists for coming and getting to share not only about your work and about your businesses and organizations, but also, you know, your own personal journeys and experiences. And this event is just always one of my absolute favorites, and it continues to be with this latest webinar. It's been recording, so we will post the recordings on both Sea Blue and Everblue's YouTube pages. So if you want to go back and listen to the entire conversation all over again, it'll be there for you to do that. Other than that, Clarissa, Lauren, do you have any last questions, words of thanks for our panelists? Thanks for the audience for joining and listening in on this conversation.
I just want to thank everyone for attending. We really love this conversation. It's one of our favorite things, like Ellie's mentioned time and again. And we just wish you all to continue the amazing work that you're doing. Sometimes it feels like you're working in a silo, but know that you're not alone. We're here as a resource, and we want to continue this conversation of linking science with business, because that is the future. We have to be working in collaboration. So thank you all. Have a wonderful holiday season. I know we're already there, but we appreciate you attending, and please stay in touch.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.